You think you know humiliation until your son tells you you're not invited to his wedding because his fiancée finds you embarrassing. I'm 69 years old, and 3 months ago I received a phone call that rewrote everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my son Daniel. He told me not to come to his wedding. He said it would be better for everyone if I just stayed home. What he forgot, in that moment of casual cruelty, was that I'd signed every check that made his life possible. Let me tell you exactly what happened, because the details matter. Daniel called me on a Tuesday evening in March. I was making tea, the kettle just starting to whistle, when my phone rang. He didn't ease into it. He didn't ask how I was doing. He just said he needed to talk about the wedding and that Stephanie had some concerns. Concerns. That's the word he used. As if uninviting your mother to your wedding was a logistical issue rather than a betrayal. Stephanie, his fiancée, apparently felt I didn't fit the aesthetic they were going for. Those were his actual words. The aesthetic. My clothes were too plain. My conversation was too simple. Her family was sophisticated, he explained, all doctors and lawyers and people who summered in the Hamptons, and she worried I'd feel out of place. He was doing me a favor, really, by suggesting I skip it. He'd send me photos. We could celebrate privately afterward, just the two of us. I stood there holding that phone, the kettle screaming behind me, and felt something fundamental break inside my chest. Not my heart exactly, something deeper. The place where you store your faith in the people you created and raised and loved without condition. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I just said okay and hung up. Then I turned off the kettle and sat down at my kitchen table in complete silence. The tea never got made. I sat there as the light faded, as the room grew dark around me, and I let myself feel the full weight of what my son had just done. I raised Daniel alone after his father left when Daniel was 6. I was a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm, competent but unremarkable, the kind of job that paid bills without ever quite covering emergencies. I stretched every dollar until it screamed. I bought his clothes at thrift stores and learned to sew patches so they looked intentional. I packed his lunches with careful attention, making sure he never went to school with less than the other children. I saved for years to afford his college application fees. I took out loans. I'm still paying off so he could attend a good university without working through school like I had. I taught him kindness. I taught him gratitude. I taught him that people mattered more than appearances, that integrity was built in small moments, that family was the foundation everything else stood on. I believed he heard me. I believed those lessons took root. I was wrong. The problems started 2 years ago when he met Stephanie at some corporate networking event. She worked in wealth management, came from money, moved through the world with the casual confidence of someone who'd never worried about anything as pedestrian as rent. Daniel was dazzled. Within months, he'd changed his entire personality to match hers. His clothes got more expensive. His vocabulary shifted. He started talking about wines and restaurants and weekend trips to places I'd never heard of. I was happy for him at first. I thought he was growing, expanding his world, becoming the successful man I'd always hoped he'd be. I didn't see what was actually happening. He wasn't expanding. He was erasing every part of himself that connected to me, to his childhood, to the life we'd built together in that small apartment with the leaking bathroom and the radiator that clanked all winter. When he brought Stephanie to meet me the first time, I cleaned my house for days. I bought new towels. I practiced recipes. I wanted to make a good impression, to show her that Daniel came from love even if he didn't come from money. She was polite, distant. She smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. She complimented my home in a way that felt like pity. Daniel barely spoke. He watched her the entire time, monitoring her reactions, adjusting himself based on the subtle shifts in her expression. After they left, I stood in my living room looking at the space they'd just occupied and felt the first tremor of fear. My son had brought a stranger into my home, and he'd sided with her before she'd even passed judgment. The visits became less frequent, the phone calls shorter. When I asked about wedding plans, Daniel was vague. He said they were keeping it small, intimate, just close family and friends. I assumed I was close family. I assumed that was a given. I didn't realize I needed to audition for the role of mother at my own son's wedding. The night he uninvited me, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks I'd been meaning to repair for years, and I let myself remember every sacrifice. Every double shift I'd worked when he needed new shoes. Every birthday party I'd thrown on a budget so small it should have been impossible. Every parent-teacher conference I'd attended alone, smiling through the exhaustion, making sure he knew he was supported. Every college care package I'd sent filled with things I'd gone without to afford. I wasn't looking for gratitude exactly, I'd never kept score. But I also never imagined I'd be discarded like an embarrassing artifact from a past he wanted to forget. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to my filing cabinet and pulled out every financial document related to Daniel. Bank statements showing tuition payments, loan documents with my signature, receipts for his apartment deposits, his car insurance, his graduate school applications. I'd kept everything, not because I planned to use it, but because I was meticulous by nature. Numbers were my profession. Records were how I made sense of the world. I added it up, slowly, carefully. The way I'd been trained. 43 years of supporting my son came to $217,000. Money I'd given freely, without contracts, without expectation of repayment, because that's what mothers do. We invest in our children's futures without demanding returns. But sitting there at my kitchen table, surrounded by decades of receipts, I realized something that made my hands shake. Daniel didn't see those payments as love. He saw them as his due. He'd taken everything I'd sacrificed and used it to build a life where I no longer fit. I called him that afternoon. He answered sounding distracted, like I was interrupting something important. I asked him very calmly if he'd really thought through what he was asking me to accept. He sighed. He said he knew it was hard, but that Stephanie's family had certain expectations and that I'd understand eventually. He said it would be awkward for everyone if I came, that I'd feel uncomfortable, that he was protecting me. I asked him if he remembered who paid for his education. The line went quiet. I asked him if he remembered who co-signed his first apartment lease when no one else would. Who paid his car insurance until he was 26? Who sent him money during graduate school when his stipend didn't cover rent? Silence. Heavy silence. Then he said something that changed everything between us forever. He said that was just what parents were supposed to do, that he hadn't asked to be born, that those expenses were my responsibility, not gifts I could hold over him. His voice had Stephanie's cadence, her phrases, her casual cruelty dressed up as psychological sophistication. I told him very quietly that he was right. Those had been my responsibilities, but attending his wedding was my right as his mother, and he'd just taken that away. I told him I needed some time to think, and I hung up before he could respond. I didn't cry that day either. I was past crying. I sat in my kitchen as afternoon faded to evening, the way I had the night before, and I made a decision that surprised even me. If Daniel wanted to treat our relationship as a transaction, then all transactions were now on the table. The next morning, I called my lawyer, the same woman who'd helped me with my will years ago. I explained the situation calmly, without emotion, the way I'd present any accounting problem that needed solving. My son had uninvited me to his wedding. He'd made it clear he was embarrassed by me. He'd also made it clear he believed the money I'd spent raising him was owed rather than given. I wanted to understand my options. She listened carefully. Then she explained something I hadn't considered. Several of the payments I'd made in recent years, particularly the graduate school support and the apartment co-signing, could legally be classified as loans rather than gifts, especially since I had documentation, especially since I was still paying off my own loans taken out for his benefit. I wasn't vindictive by nature. I'd never been the kind of person who sought revenge. But sitting in that lawyer's office, holding documents that represented my entire adult life spent in service to an ungrateful child, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, clarity. I asked her to draft a letter, a formal letter stating that I was calling in the loans, not the childhood expenses. Those were gifts and would remain gifts. But the adult support, the graduate school money, the co-signed lease, the car insurance I'd paid when he was perfectly capable of paying it himself, $37,000 total, due within 90 days. She asked if I was sure. She said family disputes rarely ended well. I told her I didn't have family anymore. I had a son who'd uninvited me to his wedding because his fiancée found me embarrassing. That wasn't family. That was a biological connection to someone who'd forgotten where he came from. The letter was delivered to Daniel's apartment on a Friday afternoon. He called me within an hour, furious, screaming, asking how I could do this to him, asking if I'd lost my mind. Stephanie was in the background saying something I couldn't quite hear. He said I was being selfish, that I was trying to ruin his wedding, that this was extortion. I waited until he ran out of breath. Then I said very calmly that extortion implied I was demanding something unreasonable. I was simply requesting repayment of loans, documented with bank statements and my own debt obligations. If he believed the money was a gift, he could explain that to a judge. If he believed parents owed their children unlimited financial support with no expectation of basic respect in return, he could make that argument in court. The line went quiet. Then he said I'd changed, that I wasn't the mother he knew, that I'd become bitter and cruel. I told him he was right about one thing. I had changed. I'd finally learned that unconditional love didn't mean accepting unconditional disrespect. Then I hung up. That was 8 weeks ago. I haven't spoken to Daniel since. His wedding happened last Saturday. I know because Stephanie posted photos all over social media, beautiful photos. The aesthetic was perfect, just as she'd wanted. Elegant venue, sophisticated guests, everyone dressed in coordinated neutrals that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. No one would have guessed the groom's mother wasn't there. No gap in the photos, no awkward explanation needed. I spent that day in my garden. I'd let it go wild over the winter, and spring was demanding attention. I pulled weeds, I trimmed back dead growth. I planted new flowers in places where old ones had failed. My hands got dirty. My back ached. It felt good to create something, to choose what deserved space and what needed to be removed. My phone rang twice that day, both times from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't answer. If Daniel wanted to speak to me, he had my number. If he wanted to explain or apologize or rage some more, he knew how to reach me. The silence told me everything I needed to know. 3 days after the wedding, my lawyer received a call from Daniel's lawyer. They wanted to negotiate. Apparently, Stephanie's family was less than thrilled to learn their new son-in-law came with significant debt to his own mother. Apparently, it looked bad, damaged the sophisticated image they were so carefully maintaining. They offered to settle for $20,000. My lawyer asked what I wanted to do. I thought about it for a long time, not because I needed the money particularly, though it would be useful, but because I needed to decide what this was really about. Revenge? Justice? A lesson? Or just the final severing of a connection that had already been destroyed? I told her to counter with the full amount plus interest on the loans I'd taken out for his benefit. $37,000 was already generous. It didn't include the childhood sacrifices, the emotional labor, the years I'd gone without, so he could have. It was simply a bill for services rendered to an adult who'd forgotten where those services came from. We settled 2 weeks later for the full amount plus $3,000 in interest. The money arrived in my account via wire transfer. No note, no apology, just numbers on a screen representing the end of everything I'd thought my relationship with my son was. I haven't heard from Daniel since. I don't expect to. He made his choice when he uninvited me to his wedding. I made mine when I asked for my money back. We're even now in the coldest possible sense. I gave him 43 years. He gave me $37,000. The math doesn't work out in anyone's favor. Some people think I went too far. My sister said I was being cruel. that you can't put a price on family, that I should have just let him get married in peace, even if I wasn't invited. Maybe she's right. Maybe there was a version of this story where I accepted the humiliation quietly, sent a gift, pretended everything was fine. But I couldn't be that person anymore. The woman who absorbed cruelty in the name of keeping the peace died the night my son told me I didn't fit his aesthetic. I'm 69 years old. I spent 43 years building a human being from scratch, teaching him values I believed mattered, showing him what unconditional love looked like. He grew up and decided I was an embarrassment. That's his right, I suppose. But it's also my right to stop funding a life where I'm not welcome. My days are quieter now. I still work part-time at the accounting firm. I still tend my garden. I still have my small routines that make up a life. The silence where Daniel used to be is real, and it aches in ways I didn't expect. But it's also cleaner than the slow erosion of dignity I was accepting before. I don't regret asking for my money back, not because I needed it, but because the transaction clarified everything. Daniel wanted me to understand that supporting him was my obligation as a parent. I wanted him to understand that respecting me was his obligation as a son. We both failed each other. But only one of us asked for something unreasonable. If Daniel ever comes back genuinely changed, genuinely understanding what he did and why it mattered, I'll listen. But I won't pretend it didn't happen. I won't absolve him just to have a relationship again. Some things can't be unsaid. Some betrayals can't be forgiven without real accountability. And I'm too old now to accept crumbs of affection from someone who should have loved me without conditions. The money sits in my savings account. I haven't touched it. I'm not sure I will. It's not about the money and never was. It's about the principle, about teaching my son one final lesson even if he never learns it. That love without respect is worthless. That gratitude matters. That you can't build a sophisticated new life by pretending the person who made it possible doesn't exist. I sleep better now than I did before the wedding. The ceiling cracks don't bother me the way they used to. The silence is mine. I chose my dignity over my son's approval, and that choice, as painful as it's been, restored something I'd been losing for years. My sense that I matter, that my feelings count, that I deserve basic human decency from the person I sacrificed everything to raise. Let me know in the comments. What would you have done in this situation? And do not forget to subscribe to Golden Years Diary for more stories like this.